So the new Styx album goes all ornithological on us, but is it at risk of being a bit of a conceptual turkey? Let's get into it, shall we? Few bands have mastered the concept album quite like Styx, from their Broadway pretensions with such albums like Paradise Theatre and the divisive Kilroy Was Here, which certainly divided the band. But with Circling From Above, they soar like the feathery characters that migrate across this album to new narrative and musical heights, honouring and building upon the critical success of Crash of the Crown. This band have managed to turn our feathery friends into quite an intriguing musical statement about the advance of technology and alienation to a certain extent. Tommy Shaw admits that it sounded risky. Circling From Above marks the band's 18th studio effort, and it was actually inspired by Shaw's interest in bird-watching apps that track migration patterns via satellite technology. And therein lies the very heart of this concept. This 41-minute journey explores the intersection where nature meets digital surveillance, wrapped up in melodic, progressive rock that, of course, Styx cut their teeth on in the 70s. And the band's lead single, of course, which was Build and Destroy, which was accompanied by quite an interesting AI-generated music video, which beautifully represents this duality between tech and nature. Lawrence Gowan describes the melody as having a Star Trek or Twilight Zone thing. Well, it's certainly these tensions and dynamics is certainly what makes classic Styx so compelling. This tech duality is fascinating, and Circling From Above has, as I said, this ornithological bent to it, where it contrasts nature with humanity's aspirations or technological aspirations. This album beautifully employs imagery with a series of metaphors for humanity's orbit, satellites drifting aimlessly versus the purposeful and measured flight of birds, travelling in unity. We examine the things we build and abandon and the disharmony of our world, emphasising the need for a kind of a greater coming together. It is certainly a meditation on mankind and examines and stresses the need for unity. It invites listeners to reflect on their own paths and choices in life, and uses the journey, that well-furrowed trope in music and art and literature, to explore ultimately the legacy we leave behind. Ultimately, it's a call for greater connection and responsibility. Maybe it's to get us to hang those fat balls out in December. But it certainly is a cinematic journey that sees Styx honouring their storied past and charting new territory. And that's certainly apparent in the very opening notes of this album, a world where melody and storytelling gracefully intermingle. The album does explore themes of perspective and renewal, if one has to, of course, identify the conceptual arc of this record, and one pregnant with allegory, as we're asked to consider the idea of fate and free will by considering at what expense all this technological advancement comes. And critics have suggested that Styx strike a perfect blend here between conceptual exploration and the musical landscapes they're famed for, if I may quote Edward Van Hoof from the Headbangers Lifestyle webpage. Styx crafts a universe where every lyric, riff and harmony serve the intensity of the compelling narrative, inviting fans to explore the band's signature blend of progressive rock and arena-ready hooks, supporting their wonderful vocal harmonies. And with their recent releases, the band has kind of reinvented themselves, minus the theatrical aspirations of one Dennis DeYoung, and prefer to lean more into classic prog than Broadway. Styx have always been adept at conveying grand stories and narratives in theatrical and camp progness. From the very dark Kilroy Was Here and the theatrical reportage of Paradise Theatre, and even more recent releases that have been certainly intriguing, from the interstellar time capsule of The Mission to the aforementioned Crash of the Crown. These recent albums saw the band embracing modern production possibilities and songsmithery, which gives their sound a contemporary feel while preserving the conceptual lushness of the past. Together with producer and songwriter Will Ivankovich, it is an album replete with intricate arrangements and gorgeous Styxian vocal harmonies that has always defined them. The production really, or the producer who has handled their last two albums, keeps the sound crisp and modern, while honouring Styx's theatrical DNA. The 13-track collection flows like chapters in Shaw's description of concept albums as writing a book in little sections. So Circling from Above continues in this run of great albums from this band. It's not tired of treading old familiar ground, but in this case taking wing and soaring above it in this wonderful conceptual reinvention. I mean, the meandering instrumentation of the opening track has a spacey Floyd-like feel to it, with close harmony vocals and sort of graceful guitar phrasing to boot, which draws the listener into the album's thematic orbit. Lawrence Gowan on this is impressive, and his voice communicates power and fragility in equal measure. And James Young's guitar solo on this is certainly worth savouring. We get Michigan, of course, which is defined by that familiar Tommy Shaw timbre. And Todd Suckerman's drumming delivers a jazzy Tom Rich dynamic interplay. King of Love is very much defined by these beautiful angelic harmonies and delicate keyboard lines driven along by this polyrhythmic drumming. And James Young's familiar growl is certainly intense. To quote one critic, the light-footed shuffles and lush harmonies are unmistakably Styx. It is fresh but rooted in their signature contemporary sound. Amen to that. It's clear it has a Celtic feel to it with this beautiful vocal interplay. Forgive us a beautiful acoustic ballad with Shaw and Gowan exchanging vocals over this pulsating bass and jazzy drums. The emotional intensity of this song builds and builds, finding a kind of denouement with Gowan's keyboard and Shaw's delicate guitar work. Everybody Raise Your Glass is almost defined by having an almost burlesque waltz to it with a stabbing piano. It's a wonderful theatrical piece that seems to doff its cap to Paradise Theatre. Blue-Eyed Raven explores some medieval textures combined with Shaw's heavily phrased vocals. Strings and mandolin combine to complement the vocal bridge and chorus. And the duel between violin and Shaw's vocals are certainly the highlight of this number. She Knows features Will Ivankovich crooning away, complemented with Shaw's sort of higher harmonies, with its carnival waltz-like feel and Tull-esque flute lines. It certainly creates a cinematic and scenic musical weave. We Lost the Wheel again is defined by acoustic instrumentation. It has a whiff of Americana to it, even a 60s vibe with the vocals very rich and commanding, which certainly express, in the words of one critic, a melancholic grandeur. The wailing guitars and short bursts of Hammond organ add a classic rock flair to this one, pressing on the song's timeless resonance. And Only You Can Decide brings the whole conceptual piece full circle, if you will. So in conclusion, I would say that Styx blend their progressive roots with a more contemporary edge and an intriguing conceptual piece. Dynamic, gripping, sweeping, introspective, theatrical, yet not in any way affected, if that makes sense. This is Styx at their most vital and most graceful, I think. And I must admit, I do love the conceptual landscapes that this band are mapping out after years of the decades of space operas and rock theatre. And Our Feathered Friends may seem like an odd choice for a concept album until you realise that they're a perfect metaphor that symbolise freedom and flight, and indeed provide the thematic counterpoint to man's technological advancement. So there you are, then, my thoughts on the brand new Styx album. Please share this video with other Styx-minded people. Click like, subscribe, check that notification bell, as it all helps the algorithm along, and check some of the links below this video for ways you can support the sterling work done a classic album review. It's always much appreciated. Become a Patreon, why not? There's a fine body of work on my Patreon now, and we're building a real classic rock community over there. Anyway, I'll just thank you for watching and leave you with my closing catchphrase, which is hope you're well, staying safe, and of course that you keep listening.